Am I just trying to wind people up and get them anxious about the next few months and the winter ahead in the Northern Hemisphere? Yes. Why? Because I genuinely am concerned. I tell you what I usually do as an exercise for people. I try and pull people back to, say, February 2020. And just imagine you knew everything that happened with the pandemic. And I took you back in time. What would you say to family and friends? Because there's no way they would believe you that there was going to be lockdown and that millions of people would die from this virus that had spread. Nobody would believe you. In the same way, that's how I feel now. When I talk about this tsunami, I use tsunami because it is an image that you can put in front of you. But in reality, the problem is that it isn't a tsunami. It's more like a storm surge or a tidal wave surge. The thing about these tidal wave surges is if you've ever been on the beach where the water has gone all the way out and you are, picking up stones, and then suddenly you notice that there's water behind you. These are these long beaches, and before you know it, the water is coming in so fast that you can't get off the beach in time. That's the picture as to where we are now. So it's not a massive wave that's coming where everybody will say, oh my goodness, that's not going to happen. That was more like what happened in COVID when there was a novel virus. But now it's going to be more like the water coming in as the tide comes in and you are not prepared. And so this is why I encourage people. First thing you have to do is make sure you hang out in the health and wellness webinar. We're very busy this week, but there are some slots left. Join us as we discuss cases and discuss situations. I can just give general principles of advice for people just to help them to understand a little bit more about how the system is working and what you can do, because this is the mistake people make, is that they think that this is just about COVID and severe COVID. No, no, no. Here is what the reality is. Okay, I'm going to use the UK as an example because this is just happens to be here, and they thankfully give us real numbers. So this is from wire.gov, which is the UK's number one public sector news alerting service, and it was published on the 12th of September 2024, so a couple of weeks ago. And it highlighted for the NHS this was the busiest ever summer for accident and emergency departments. Okay? The busiest ever summer for accident and emergency departments. I repeat that. Now, it was seeing what 6.8 million attendances in the 3 month period of time. And this is up from about 240,000 from 2023. And 2023 was one of the busiest years as well. So, this is what I mean with regards to the storm surge. People think that it is just a sudden thing. No, no, no. This has been building. This is why I kept on talking about the COVID storm. The COVID storm is happening. It's just at the moment, it is happening in such a way that people are not aware that this is a COVID storm. And that's very difficult to get. And this is across the board. I just happen to have had the time and the research interest to be observing this for years. This is not something that is suddenly appearing. This COVID storm I'm talking about, that spike mediated autoimmune response, is just something that builds. It builds like a tidal wave surge. And to emphasize the point, I have got here an image or a quick video from Incredible Tidal Waves just to show you how I think this is going to play out. Take a look at this and tell me if this makes sense to you. This is, I think, from China. Context of this situation. It catches you off guard because it just gradually comes. It's like a wave and it just doesn't stop coming. And this is where we are now because the situation is at the moment just gradually rising year on year. Now, let me explain to you why it's relevant to you, whatever your status with vaccination or otherwise, or if you think that you're in great immune condition and you're not worried about any virus. Let me explain to you how this works. I'm going to show you a case, and this was just published on the 23rd of September. So I'm going to go through this with you just to give you some ideas as to how this works. So this is in the Mail Online, and this is UK, and this was published on the 23rd of September 2024. And it was a disabled woman who suffered a severe asthma attack, died after waiting 39 hours in a chair in a busy A&E department. She was 46 years old. I'll not too worry too much about which hospital this was. But the first thing that I want you to note is that this was in 2022. This was not 2024. This was 2022. This was just around the time of the Omicron cases rising, and hospitals were full. So this is very, very important. Let me just get back to the story here again, and you'll understand why this time is so important. So the A&E staff underestimated the severity of her condition, and they failed to give her a specialist drug or refer her to critical care. She spent 2 nights in a chair, and on the second morning, she was found collapsed. This is her. We condolences to the family. But I'll just go down here, and this is when she had a cardiac arrest. Okay, I'm going to come back to that in a minute because there are some important details. Because what I'm pointing out to you is this was occurring in 2022. So the wave of COVID was already there in relation to Omicron. And so when you actually look in detail at what was said in this case here, and look at this here, this is what you have to get into your head. She was seen by a doctor at around 9 p.m. on the 20th. She died on the 22nd, okay? She was then decided that decision to admit was made on the at 11 p.m. on the 20th. But the A&E was extremely busy, and there were 109 people in the department, and around half of them waiting for a bed. Okay? That's the bit that a lot of people underestimate. When the pressure hits, people think this is just about COVID. When everybody is sick in accident and emergency, and the staff are overwhelmed because there are so many patients, and there are no beds in the hospital because there are so many patients, and the patients in the hospital are sick, so you can't discharge them, and the ones who are not so sick can't function because they're older and they're having longer term impacts of COVID. Suddenly, if you had a heart attack or an asthma attack, you still can't get a bed. That's where it becomes very relevant to everybody, because it will impact, if not you directly, your loved ones, your aunts, your cousins, your grandmother, because there are no beds in the system. So I take you back, just remember that I'm going to come back to it again. Now look back at where we are now. The busiest summer ever. That's where we are. Challenging. So they are expecting a challenging winter period. I agree completely. There is huge pressure on services, and patients are waiting too long for care. Look, accident and emergency admissions rose to 525,000 in August from 523 a year earlier. These are hospital admissions into hospital, because people, growing numbers of unwell patients who need to be admitted into hospital. So this is what I'm telling you. I'm not making this up. I just happen to be following the data and know why it's happening. And this is why I'm telling you this is what is very likely to happen. I have to say likely because I can't afford to gamble and say it absolutely is going to happen. But it's so likely that if it doesn't happen, I'm going to say, my goodness, how didn't that happen? Not, I didn't expect that to happen. This is that serious. The system is under pressure, but they pointed out, it's important to acknowledge where there were successes, that even though it was under pressure, they had discharged, transferred, admitted, transferred, or discharged more than 76% of patients within 4 hours in A&E, which was an increase from August 2023. Okay, so they have been making some progress, but this is because they are trying to get on top of the problem. And this is talking about overall backlog of care. But here is the other bit that people need to be aware of. I'm trying to find the section. I'd read this before. Let me come back to, oh, yes, there it is. Ambulance services responded to 730,000 incidents last month, up by 22,700 in the year. Of that, 73,000 were the most serious Category 1 calls, which is 28% higher than the pre pandemic period in 2019. Okay? The resources are not there. Nobody's prepared for this. The investment in resources for a 28% increase in sick people, it's not there. So the problem that people need to think about carefully is, what do you do if you or a loved one needs to go into hospital with this kind of pressure that is building? Okay? Now, I'm going to come back to the case of Marina, because I think Marina is a very important case. And if there are any clinical people who are listening here, I will explain to you what it is that I observe and why I think these cases are going to be increasing. They are increasing. It's just that nobody is noticing. So watch very carefully here in this case. So on the 20th of June, she came into hospital because she felt wheezy and they thought that she was suffering from an asthma attack. Now, you have to remember that my information is limited. I'm just going from what they are writing in the paper. So I don't have any other information, but I'm able to dissect even that information and kind of picture what was happening. And I'll explain to you how this works. So, when she arrived at 7:25 p.m., they explained her medical history. She has spina bifida as well. But because of COVID restrictions that were present still at the same time, they weren't allowed to stay. Now, as I said, she was seen at 9 p.m. and decided to be admitted at 11 p.m. She was given antibiotics for a suspected infection. Okay, that's very important. It wasn't definite. Now, once I see suspected infection here, what that suggests to me is that maybe it wasn't so obvious, meaning that because she would have had a chest x ray and they probably didn't see anything obvious, any consolidation on the chest x ray, but her inflammatory markers were probably going to be up and she was short of breath. And so, therefore, the assumption is that this is likely to be an infection. So, they would have put her on antibiotics. The reason I'm highlighting that is because what I have observed is that for many people, this is COVID. It's just subclinical COVID. So you have to remember the COVID storm I'm talking about is not new. It's just the wave that is increasing. So oftentimes people have a viral pneumonia, sometimes with secondary bacterial infection, because of COVID. It's suppressing their immune system. And critically, they have viral sepsis, viruses circulating in the bloodstream. Really, really important. Now, the reason why I know that there was something not quite right in this situation is that she was in A&E for 39 hours. If she had a very significant asthma attack, she would have been escalated, meaning that you would have given priority to her getting a hospital bed. The truth is that if you are not so sick, you have to go down the priority. The really sick patients who need close monitoring and you can't afford to keep in accident and emergency, you have to get them into a bed on the ward. And so that suggests to me that maybe they were thinking that she would get better with nebulization and antibiotics. She was in hospital for 30 hours. So the hope would have been that she would have gotten better and you would have gotten her back out of hospital. So let's go back to the case here. In this case, there was a delay with her being seen by a senior consultant, and a referral was made to the respiratory team. So that means that she was stable enough that they thought that the respiratory team could have reviewed her in accident and emergency and made a decision. So this indicates she probably wasn't that frighteningly unwell. However, she deteriorated on the 22nd in the morning. This is a day and a half later. They knew that she had asthma. She was being treated for a chest infection. And then at 9:25 on the 22nd, she was reviewed by a doctor who noted she was speaking in short sentences but was visibly breathless. Now, again, you have to remember that even though the person was in A&E and they weren't admitted, it's very likely they were still having observations done. And so what it indicates is that most likely overnight, her observations were stable, else it would have been escalated earlier. So most likely, what you have to remember as well is that because she was in hospital for so long, a doctor who admitted her would have handed her on to another doctor. But that doctor may not necessarily have seen her because unless there was a problem, they wouldn't need to get involved because she was just waiting on admission. But then when that doctor who has been handed over is handed over again, that doctor wouldn't necessarily need to see her because she's supposed to be stable and admitted. This is why I'm saying that my inference is that she was stable in accident and emergency, still probably needing some oxygen, needed to be admitted, but was stable on antibiotics. Then she suddenly deteriorates at about 9:25 because clearly somebody escalated the situation to the doctor. The doctor then reviews her, notices that she's unwell, and this is when I think within about 20 minutes she's found collapsed in her chair in a cardiac arrest. They tried to resuscitate her. Now, I don't have the details, but the question then is, was it a respiratory arrest, meaning that because of her asthma, she couldn't breathe, then she collapsed and had a cardiac arrest because of it? Or did she have a primary cardiac arrest on top of the fact that she already had a chest infection and an asthma attack? The reason why I'm trying to differentiate that is because in the context of the COVID storm that I keep on talking about, a lot of the patients may have a subclinical inflammation around their heart. That's the myocarditis, because remember, you've got viral sepsis. The virus is circulating, it targets the heart as well, especially Omicron. We've found from the research has shown that it seems to particularly hit the heart. And so, if you have a situation where somebody's unwell and even mild subclinical inflammation in the heart, you can then have an abnormal arrhythmia. And that's what would cause somebody to go into cardiac arrest. So if she hadn't deteriorated, because again, just extrapolating, if she was in A&E and she was gradually deteriorating so severely, she would have been moved to the resuscitation room. These are just standard things that usually happen. So everything there suggests that the deterioration was extremely quick in that 20-minute, half an hour period of time when she died. And again, it is very sad. The only warning that I would give to clinicians at the moment is that the pressure is building. And this case occurred in 2022. It has just been through the coroner in 2024. It's taken 2 years to get the inquest done. And so, what we're likely to be seeing is similar patterns occurring. And therefore, the inquests are going to be coming 2 to 3 years down the line. Who is going to take the can? The clinicians, the doctors, the nurses who are taking care of the patient. They're going to get the blame because they didn't do something in the appropriate time, not taking into consideration the extreme pressure that they are working under. This is why I'm saying it to people. You need to be aware of the extreme pressure the system will be under. Mistakes are more likely to occur. You don't want it to happen to your relative. So you have to be well educated, well versed as to how do you manage these situations, and critically try not to get sick this winter. So that's my point for today. And this is part of the reason why I continue to talk about these health and wellness network. I can take questions and try and help people to understand the challenges that they're facing, how they must approach it. It's very, very difficult now for people because on top of this, you have the fact that many people are not very sick. And so, therefore, they are sick, but not deathly sick. The system only has the capacity at the moment to deal with really sick patients. That's the problem. And additionally, I'll encourage you to make sure that you sign up for our Disease X. We've hit through the Kickstarter. We're working on the book now, and you can pre order it because we're trying to see if we can get this to number one on Amazon. When I say Disease X, for me, everything is about COVID. So that's what I'm talking about. Whenever other people are talking about Disease X, they're talking about some new virus that has been cooked up somewhere. I don't know. But for me, COVID is not over. You need to be prepared. And more critically, you need to have the resources available to be able to handle the challenges that are ahead. Thank you. I hope this was valuable information and look forward to sharing more information with you in the near future. Have a good evening.